Now, turning now, big business incentives passed this week in Lansing that could help Michigan land the Taiwanese company Foxconn that's looking to expand in the U.S. Now, it wasn't easy for Governor Snyder to get this good jobs package passed, even among members of his own party. So here's the deal for you. The program allows a company that creates up to 3,000 jobs with pay that matches the average regional wage to keep all new employee income taxes for up to 10 years. Now, this is interesting news here because this was a bipartisan effort. The question was this really necessary to make Michigan competitive? And you hear critics from the governor's own party saying, we didn't need to do this. Nolan, did the state need to do this?
You know, I believe the state did need to do this. The state has already done everything I think it could do to rationalize its business tax climate for everybody, for overall, and yet it still wasn't making the final rounds in competition for these big projects. You got Foxconn dangling 5,000 jobs out there. Who knows whether Michigan's actually got a shot at those or not? But if you look at the state, it's got and the things people or businesses are looking for when they do site selection. Michigan's got not the greatest workforce to offer up. Its infrastructure is subpar, so you have to put sweeteners on the table to make up for some of those things. And I think the way this was crafted in that very limited way, it's not there for everyone and it's not permanent. Very few projects are going to come in here and create 3,000 jobs, so it doesn't put us on the hook for, you know, like the last round.
It's capped at 200. It's capped at 200 million and 15 new projects a year.
So
you know, but the problem is that those other problems you talk about are systemic problems.
Right.
And so you get 3,000 jobs or 5,000 jobs from Foxconn, but the next company that you need to come here and help jumpstart the economy is also skeptical of all these other things. I mean, we do have to deal with those other things. We have to deal with public education in this state, which is not getting the outcomes that we want and hasn't been for a really long time. Our rate of attainment in higher ed is falling way behind other states. Business leaders for Michigan, when the governor was elected, talked about wanting to increase the number of college graduates, but I can't remember what the number was, but we're not. I think it was 100,000 by the end of the decade. I don't think we're close to that. The infrastructure problems that we have, and those are the things that we're not focused on, and this governor has not focused on enough. He hasn't been successful at getting the things done that I think he hoped to get done when he was elected in 2010, to be able to not have to throw money at companies.
Well, okay, before we talk about throwing money, because it does come down to a big price tag when you're talking about education, infrastructure, business incentives. It's all talking a little bit about money. But does this specific good jobs package, Nolan, put us on par with the other Midwest states that are around us? Or are we still behind, though, when it comes to spending and incentives?
Well, yeah, well, we're certainly not where some of the states are. Ohio, particularly, right? You know, who is willing to pour whatever it takes in to get a big company. I think this is the right way to do it because it captures the growth and tax revenue created by these projects. That wouldn't be there without the project, so it doesn't dip in to the general fund at all. I mean, I don't like the idea of corporate welfare on any form, whether it's for a sports stadium or whatever, but sometimes there's things you have to do if you're going to jumpstart an economy that has lagged for so long and still has a ways to go.
Okay, so how long does that, there's sometimes you need to do some things. How far does that go when it comes to investing in what Stephen was starting to talk about in our roads, which I feel like in infrastructure, we've had this argument for so many years.
Nobody wants to do that.
Education, that we can go back and forth about what is needed to change in education, well, but I think some people can agree that an infusion of some more money and resources
but where's that going to come
might be part of it as well. That's the question. Where does this come from?
If you don't grow, and this is a growth package. This is designed to grow population, grow jobs. If you don't grow, you can't do all the things you're talking about. You can't get enough money from the existing population to do all of those things.
Well, see,
you
that's
need
where
more
we would
people,
disagree.
more money, more investment in this state. That's not like these companies who come in here will be paying no taxes. They will be paying a considerable tax bill, property taxes to their local communities and to the state education fund. You have to have growth. We've got to grow ourselves out of this problem rather than just keep sucking more money out of the people who live here and are fairly overburdened.
Is that a fair assessment?
I don't think it's entirely fair. Number one, There are people who are not asked to pay their fair share in this state, who should be. Other states that are seeing their economies grow faster do it differently in terms of the way that they tax people. Most people here could pay less if we asked just a little more from certain people who are never asked to give more. The other thing that's true is that the way we spend money in this state doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense either. The prison budget is still sucking up an enormous amount of public funds. We have to have a governor and a legislature who are committed to a fundamental change in the way we spend money and the way we raise money in this state, and nobody is talking about any of those things right now in Lansing. And that's, I think, when Governor Snyder leaves office, that will be among the biggest failures of his time here. He came into office wanting to do those things, wanting to have those conversations, wanting to get the legislature to invest more in long-term growth.
Is that his failure, or is that the legislature's failure?
I think the legislature was the cause of the failure. They didn't want to do it. But as governor, your job ultimately is to convince the legislature to enact your agenda. The reason Jennifer Granholm was so heavily criticized as governor was because she could not do that. She could not manage the relationship with legislators well enough to get things enacted. This governor will ultimately be a failure in the same regard.
Can you really make that? Can you make that comparison?
I don't think you can at all.
On this issue,
I think if you look at what he's done in terms of particularly in the first term, fixing the business tax code to make us more competitive and to attract more jobs and investments, that has worked. It's still working.
But if it were working, he wouldn't be throwing incentives at them now.
If you look at the bill he got passed yesterday in the legislature, that had no chance a few weeks ago, and he ended up with 75 votes, including 40 from his own Republican caucus. I thought that would squeak by, and it passed, going away. So I don't think it's fair to say he's.
But that's him going back on the policy that he adopted 6 years ago.
He got.
How do you give him credit for that?
He got money for infrastructure. He didn't get all the money he wanted, but he finally did get some infrastructure money passed. I think he's been far more effective than you portray. I think it would be wrong to call him a failure on these sorts of policy issues. He has dealt, particularly in the second term, with a very ideological legislature, but at key moments, he has gotten most of the time what he wants.
How do you work with a legislature which seems like the majority of them say we don't want any kind of tax at all, and I don't want that on my record that I voted for any kind of tax increase? Because you're talking about incremental increases for certain things like infrastructure.
I mean, this legislature, let's be clear, this is one of the worst group of legislators that at least I've seen in my lifetime in Michigan. I think there are a number of reasons that that's true. I don't think it has to do with the choices that we're making at the ballot box. It has to do with the structure that presents those choices. Term limits, the way that we allow this state to be redistricted every 10 years in a hyper-partisan way, those things have created a situation where the choices you have are between this extremist and that one of one party, and there is no competitive. What are we down to? 8 competitive legislative districts in this state that could get that where either party has a reasonable chance of winning. It's really low. I mean, it's horribly low for more than 100 people being in office. That's the problem, and until we are willing to sort of address that, I think we're going to be stuck with a legislature that is not very effective and not willing to talk about issues in a substantive way, but only in a partisan way.
I would agree that this is the worst legislature we've had until we get the next one. Primarily, I would put it wholly on.
Because we'll kick them all out in 6 years and have new people.
I put it wholly on term limits. But I also disagree that the answer to Michigan's problems is more taxes. I think we've had economic stagnation
maybe a different
here.
Tax.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you could replace the income tax with a series of other taxes, and maybe you experience what Tennessee has experienced. But we have had economic stagnation for 15, 16, 17 years. We're just now starting to grow. I don't think you want to slap that growth with tax hikes. That may chill it. I think you've got to figure out a way how to get more jobs and people. We lost 1 million people here, and that is it is hard to tell the the remaining people that, well, there's 1 million people gone and all their tax dollars and all that employment, you got to make up the difference and then some so we can do these other things.
I mean, the problem with the growth we're having is that it's coming from favors we've done at the top of the economic ladder.
No, not at all.
That's absolutely true.
No.
Examples.
The giant corporate tax break that this governor enacted when he got into office, the tax hikes on pensioners and seniors, on individuals. I mean, we're growing that way as opposed to doing it with investment at the bottom, investment on the bottom line, on the foundational things that make a state competitive. Schools, infrastructure.
But where are you going to get those investment dollars from a smaller pool of taxpayers?
But if you hadn't,
you've got to get people in here to pay taxes.
But if you hadn't given almost $2 billion to corporations, that you now say need another $200 million in incentives to come here because, well, that wasn't enough. You could have been doing other things.
Maybe you could have. Maybe
like
you
reprioritized.
Bit of a cycle to bring more people in, but you have to. But they're not brought in because of the conditions of the storm.
It's a longer game.
We've got more startup businesses going now than we ever had. You've got more small business growth all of a sudden than we've ever had. You've got to do things to stimulate growth.
All right.
Short-term growth is different from long-term growth.
You know, I knew someone was going to try to sneak in the last word on this.
There's no reason to think it's short-term growth.